My name is Ava James. I was 33 years old the night my brother dragged me by the wrist across a ballroom floor to present me as a punchline. He did not ask if I wanted to meet his new father-in-law. His fingers locked over my pulse, pulling me past tables covered in imported orchids and crystal centerpieces. Flashbulbs went off around us, catching the gleam of the chandeliers and the tailored seams of Liam's tuxedo. He stopped in front of a man who owned half the logistics tech in Silicon Valley, pointed at me, and smiled. "This is our family failure," Liam said. My parents stood right behind him, holding champagne. "We try not to brag about her," my mother added, her voice light and practiced. They waited for the billionaire to laugh. But here is what none of them knew. I was not a failure. I was the person holding the keys to the empire they were trying to buy their way into. And the man they were trying to impress already knew it. Welcome to Revenge Order, where we share stories of quiet resilience and the moments the truth finally balances the ledger. How old were you when you realized your family was never going to change? Drop your age in the comments and subscribe. Now let me tell you what happened when the laughing stopped. The wedding took place at an estate overlooking the Pacific. California money has a specific sound to it. It sounds like a string quartet playing over the rhythm of the ocean, and caterers moving with quiet precision. I spent the first 2 hours of the reception seated at table 42. It was tucked in a back corner right near the kitchen swing doors. A draft of cold air hit my shoulders every time a waiter pushed through. I did not mind the cold. I watched the staff chart their paths through the room, calculating their routing efficiency. My brain maps systems automatically. Flow, bottlenecks, dead zones. I am a data systems architect. I look at complex networks and locate the hidden pulse. My family looked at me and saw a void. Liam was marrying Elise Sterling. Elise was sharp, the CFO of her father's division. Marcus Sterling was the father, a titan in the tech industry, a man who built his fortune on ruthless logic and unshakable data. My parents had spent the last year treating the engagement like a corporate acquisition. They had funded Liam's startup failures for a decade. They covered his venture capital losses, paid for his luxury loft, and bankrolled his image as a visionary founder. Meanwhile, I paid my own state college tuition by working night shifts at a server farm. In their eyes, Liam carried the potential. I just carried a laptop. When Liam grabbed my wrist, it was not out of brotherly inclusion. He needed a prop. He needed to show Marcus Sterling that he was the apex predator of our family, the shining success standing next to the disappointment. He pulled me to the center of the room. Marcus stood near the head table, flanked by 3 men in dark suits. He held a glass of scotch, the amber liquid catching the light. Liam stepped into his line of sight, dragging me forward. "Marcus," Liam said, his voice projecting the effortless charm he used on investors, "I want to introduce you to my sister Ava. This is our family failure." My mother stepped up beside Liam. She offered a soft, apologetic smile. "We try not to brag about her. She just does little computer projects. Nothing like Liam's vision." Liam extended his free hand toward Marcus, expecting a handshake, a shared joke, an acknowledgement of his superiority. Marcus Sterling did not look at Liam's hand. He did not laugh. The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10. It was long enough for the confident curve of Liam's jaw to tighten. The string quartet kept playing, but the air within our small circle turned to ice. Marcus lowered his glass. His gaze moved from my face to the posture of my shoulders, taking in the cheap fabric of my dress, and then locked onto my eyes. He stopped swirling his drink. The ice settled. "So it is you," Marcus said. His voice barely carried over the music, but it had the weight of iron. "This is unexpected." Liam blinked. His hand dropped to his side. "Sir, I just meant—" "You can stop talking now," Marcus said. He did not raise his voice. He did not break eye contact with me. The dismissal hit Liam like a physical blow. The golden boy, the tech visionary, swatted away like a nuisance in front of his new wife's father. My father stepped forward, attempting to salvage the moment. "Marcus, I think there is a misunderstanding. Ava is just—" "A ghost," Marcus interrupted. He handed his glass to one of the men in dark suits. "A ghost who builds better architecture than anyone in this room." My mother let out a nervous, confused breath. Liam stared at me, his mouth slightly open, the smirk entirely gone. The reality of the moment was failing to process in his mind. The sister he had spent his life stepping on had just been recognized by the man he was trying to worship. Marcus gestured toward the open glass doors leading to the moonlit terrace. "Walk with me, Ava." He did not wait for my answer. He turned and walked toward the night air. I looked at Liam. His face was pale, his eyes darting between me and the retreating billionaire. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply pulled my wrist out of his loosened grip, adjusted my sleeve, and followed Marcus out the door, leaving my family standing in the wreckage of their own punchline. The terrace air was sharp, laced with salt and the faint scent of eucalyptus. Marcus closed the heavy glass doors behind us, cutting off the string quartet and the suffocating heat of 100 networking guests. Out here, the Pacific Ocean rolled against the cliffs in a steady, rhythmic pulse. It sounded like logic. It sounded like a system functioning exactly as designed. Marcus walked to the stone railing and rested his hands on the cold surface. He did not speak immediately. He looked out at the dark water, letting the silence clear the noise of the ballroom from our ears. I stood a few feet away, keeping my posture neutral. I was used to powerful men needing a moment to process the fact that the person who solved their impossible problem did not look the way they expected. 2 years ago, Marcus began, his voice calm and leveled to the sound of the waves. The West Coast shipping ports went dark. A coordinated ransomware strike hit the central dispatch servers. Every container manifest, every rail transfer, every customs clearance vanished behind a cryptographic lock. I knew the event well. It had made national news. Cargo ships sat anchored in the bay like ghost towns. Freight trains idled on the tracks. Every hour the system remained locked cost the industry tens of millions in spoiled goods and broken contracts. Sterling Logistics was hemorrhaging capital, Marcus continued. My internal teams were paralyzed. The federal cyber units were offering timelines measured in weeks, not days. And then, at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, a patch arrived in my chief security officer's inbox. No name attached, just a generic email address and a string of executable code. He turned his head to look at me. The ambient light from the ballroom cast sharp shadows across his face. It was a ghost routing algorithm, he said. It did not try to break the encryption. It simply built a new, temporary highway around the infected sectors, hijacking secondary nodes to keep the freight moving while the main system sat in quarantine. It was elegant. It was invisible. It saved my company nearly $500 million over the next 5 days. I kept my gaze steady. I remember that Tuesday. I was a mid-level contractor working the night shift at a third-party data center. My desk was wedged under a flickering fluorescent light. While my parents were busy co-signing a loan for Liam's third attempt at a visionary tech startup, I was drinking stale coffee and monitoring server temperatures to pay my rent. When the port strike happened, I watched the network cascade failure ripple across my monitors. I did not write the ghost route for glory. I wrote it because watching a system collapse makes my brain itch. I mapped the dead zones, stitched the nodes together, sent the file, and went back to eating my cold sandwich. I spent 18 months hunting for the architect of that code, Marcus said. The outsourced data center had terrible records. The email bounced back. The IP address was masked. My security team combed through hundreds of shift logs and access badges. 3 weeks ago, they finally found a digital fingerprint linking the routing logic to a specific terminal login. They pulled the badge photo. He gestured vaguely toward the glass doors. And then tonight, my future son-in-law drags you across a dance floor and introduces the person I have been hunting for as the family failure. A dry, brief sound escaped his throat. It was not quite a laugh, more like an acknowledgement of the absurd. "You should have charged me a consulting fee, Ava," he said quietly. "I do not write code for recognition," I replied. "The system was broken. I just realigned the flow." That is exactly why we are standing out here, he said, his tone shifting from reflective to strictly business. I am a man who respects realignment, and right now, I have a system that feels misaligned. He turned his back to the ocean and faced the ballroom. Through the glass, we could see Liam. My brother had recovered his composure. He was laughing, pouring champagne for my parents, commanding the attention of a small circle of investors. He looked exactly like the man he was pretending to be. Elise is my only daughter, Marcus said. His voice lost its corporate polish, revealing a layer of protective steel. She is brilliant. She runs my finance division. She loves your brother. I do not interfere with her personal choices. But I am currently finalizing the acquisition of Liam's logistics AI startup. It is a 9-figure buyout. The ink is supposed to dry by the end of the month. I nodded slowly, understanding the shape of the conversation. You are conducting due diligence. My teams have conducted due diligence, Marcus corrected. They looked at the spreadsheets Liam provided. They looked at the user acquisition charts. On paper, his startup is a rocket ship. The client engagement numbers are flawless. The retention rates are perfect. He stepped closer to me, lowering his voice. But you and I both know that real systems have friction. Hardware degrades, users churn, packets drop. Perfection is usually a symptom of a manipulated data set. His metrics are too clean. They look synthetic. I looked through the glass at Liam. He was tapping his temple, gesturing broadly, selling a vision to a captive audience. My parents watched him with unguarded adoration. This was the son they had bankrolled. This was the name they wanted to carry their legacy. I need someone who can see the invisible threads, Marcus said. My internal auditors are looking at the surface paint. I need someone to check the foundation. I want you to run a shadow audit on Liam's company, quietly, independent of my formal teams. You get backdoor access to the raw data sets. You tell me if the asset is hollow before my daughter ties her reputation and my capital to it. The request hung in the cold air between us. Auditing my brother was not a standard contract. It was a declaration of familial war. If I went into those servers and found rot, there would be no turning back. My parents would view it as an act of profound betrayal. They would frame it as jealousy. They would defend Liam, just as they had defended him every time he borrowed my homework, took credit for my ideas, or shoved me out of the frame in family photos. I watched William, my father, pat Liam proudly on the shoulder. They were so desperate to belong in this room, so eager to trade my dignity for a seat at the billionaire's table. I did not want revenge. Revenge is an emotion, and emotions cloud data. But I wanted the truth. I believed in the unshakable reality of numbers. A flawed structure will eventually collapse, and when Liam's startup fell, it would crush anyone standing underneath it, including Elise. I need root access to his server logs, I said, keeping my voice devoid of hesitation. Not the curated reports, the raw, unfiltered packet data, and I need it by morning. Marcus gave a single decisive nod. A link will be in your secure inbox before you wake up. I did not return to table 42. I left the estate without saying goodbye to my parents, without watching Liam cut the cake, and without drinking another drop of champagne. I gave my valet ticket to the attendant, tipped him, and drove north toward the city. The highway stretched out ahead of me, empty and quiet. When I unlocked the door to my San Francisco apartment, the air inside was still and familiar. I bypassed the kitchen, walking straight into my home office. 3 large monitors sat asleep on a matte black desk. I set my clutch down, kicked off my heels, and pressed the power button on the primary tower. The fans spun to life. The screens flickered, casting a blue glow across the dark room. A secure message was already waiting in my encrypted client portal. The sender was anonymous, but the subject line contained a single string of alphanumeric access codes. The shadow audit was authorized. I cracked my knuckles, pulled my keyboard forward, and initiated the handshake protocol. The ticking clock to the merger had officially started. My apartment in San Francisco was a study in subtraction. bare walls, clean surfaces, and a single ergonomic chair facing a custom-built processing rig. I did not keep framed photos or decorative clutter. My life existed within the blue glow of 3 curved monitors. Outside, the early morning fog rolled over the bay, smothering the city in a dense, gray chill. Inside, the only sound was the crisp, rhythmic clatter of mechanical keyboard switches. I initiated the backdoor access key Marcus Sterling had provided. The firewall guarding Liam's company, Aegis Logistics, recognized the token and parted without resistance. I was in. Aegis Logistics was the crown jewel of my family's fabricated reality. For the past 2 years, my mother had sent me links to business articles profiling Liam. Photos of him ringing ceremonial bells, cutting ribbons at tech incubators, and standing on stages with venture capitalists. He wore expensive turtlenecks and talked about revolutionizing supply chain telemetry. My parents treated those articles like gospel. They viewed his success as the natural yield of their investment in his potential. I bypassed the polished executive summaries Liam had handed to Marcus's due diligence team. Dashboards and pie charts are built to tell a specific story. I did not care about the story. I wanted the raw, unfiltered packet data. I pulled the server access logs for the last 90 days. Millions of lines of code cascaded down my center screen, a digital river of timestamps, IP addresses, and user query metrics. I leaned back, letting my eyes unfocus slightly, waiting for my brain to catch the rhythm of the information. Organic digital traffic has a distinct texture. It looks like a crowded city intersection. Users log in at random intervals, they pause to read, they click the wrong buttons, they leave items in carts, they drop off when their Wi-Fi stutters. Organic growth is messy, erratic, and deeply human. The traffic flowing through Aegis Logistics was not human. I isolated the user acquisition metrics from the third quarter. According to the executive summary, Liam's platform had onboarded 40,000 new enterprise users in October alone. I cross-referenced those user accounts with the back-end server pings. The rhythm was wrong. I zoomed in on a specific cluster of accounts supposedly based in the Midwest. They all logged into the Aegis terminal between 2 and 4 in the morning. They all initiated a route optimization query. They all let the query run for exactly 4.2 seconds. Then they logged out. I pulled another cluster. Same pattern. The timing was flawless. The intervals were mathematically perfect. It was a metronome, ticking in the dark. Liam did not have 40,000 new enterprise clients. He had a bot farm. My fingers flew across the keyboard, typing command prompts to trace the origin of the synthetic traffic. He was using a network of ghost servers to ping his own platform, generating fake activity to inflate his daily active user count. He was manufacturing a mirage of exponential growth to justify the 9-figure valuation Marcus Sterling was about to pay. The entire startup was a hollow shell, propped up by automated scripts talking to themselves in an empty room. While parsing the routing script that directed the bot traffic, a line of syntax caught my eye. I stopped typing. I leaned closer to the monitor. Embedded in the routing header, hidden beneath layers of poorly written masking code, was a single comment tag: //AJ_protocol_0. A cold prickle of recognition traced the back of my neck. That was not standard developer shorthand. That was my shorthand. AJ, Ava James. Protocol 0 was a naming convention I used back in college when I was drafting experimental routing logic on an old external drive. It was a quirk, a digital signature I left in my raw architecture before finalizing a build. I stared at the glowing text. How did Liam's development team get a hold of my old syntax? Did they scrape an old open-source repository I contributed to years ago? Did Liam hire someone I used to study with? The anomaly bothered me, a puzzle piece that belonged to a different board. But I could not afford to chase a ghost in the code right now. The bot farm was the immediate threat. I flagged the line of code, saved the directory path to a secure folder, and pushed the personal distraction aside. I had to follow the current. Generating synthetic traffic on this scale is not a victimless crime against a spreadsheet. It requires immense computational power. Renting the server space to run millions of automated pings every single week requires a staggering amount of capital. Amazon Web Services and offshore hosting farms do not take payment in venture capital press releases. They require hard currency. If Aegis Logistics was generating fake users, they were not generating real revenue. The legitimate client base was a fraction of what Liam claimed. The legitimate revenue could barely cover the office lease in Silicon Valley, let alone the operational burn rate of a massive bot farm. I opened a secondary terminal window and initiated a financial trace. I bypassed the sanitized corporate ledgers Liam had provided to the Sterling acquisition team. Instead, I dug into the raw payment gateways connected to the Aegis hosting infrastructure. The financial architecture was clumsier than the bot scripts. Liam's team had tried to bury the server expenses under a category labeled Algorithmic Research and Development. I decrypted the vendor payout logs and isolated the destination accounts. Every Friday, a substantial wire transfer left the Aegis operating account. It bounced through a clearinghouse in Delaware, stripping the identifying metadata, before landing in a regional bank account. I ran a reverse search on the destination routing number. The account belonged to an entity called Desert Sky Holdings. I accessed the State Business Registry database and pulled the incorporation documents. Desert Sky Holdings was a limited liability company registered to a P.O. box in Henderson, Nevada. No physical office, no named executives, just a registered agent operating out of a strip mall. It was a classic shell company, designed specifically to absorb capital and obscure the final destination. I tallied the wire transfers over the past 8 months. The numbers climbing on my screen were suffocating. The Nevada shell company was draining Aegis Logistics dry. The startup was not just failing to generate profit, it was actively bleeding cash at an unsustainable velocity. The venture capital funding Liam had secured the previous year was almost entirely depleted. He had burned through millions of dollars to keep the fake servers running, buying just enough time to trick Marcus Sterling into an acquisition before the entire house of cards collapsed. I sat back in my chair. The fog outside my window had shifted, turning the morning sky a bruised purple. The data told a clear, undeniable story of fraud, but the math still held a glaring contradiction. Running a bot farm of this magnitude cost roughly $200,000 a month. Liam's initial venture capital seed round had been exhausted by quarter 2. The company accounts had hit the red months ago. Yet the wire transfers to the Nevada shell company had never missed a Friday. The bot farm kept running. The fake traffic kept flowing. Liam was broke. His startup was broke. The venture capital was gone. I stared at the blinking cursor on my screen, listening to the hum of my processor fan. If Aegis Logistics was out of money, who was secretly funding the millions required to keep the fake servers running? My phone vibrated against the matte finish of my desk, just as I isolated the final Nevada routing number. The screen illuminated the dark room, displaying a short text from my mother. "Dinner tonight at 7. Please be on time." The word please carried a distinct weight. It was not a polite request. It was a summons drafted under duress. The digital anomalies I had spent the morning uncovering were already bleeding into the physical world. Liam was paranoid. He had spent his entire life controlling the narrative, and my sudden departure with Marcus Sterling at the wedding had introduced a variable he could not manipulate. He needed to read my face. He needed to know what the billionaire had said to the family failure on that moonlit terrace. I closed my terminal windows, locked my workstation, and changed into a simple charcoal sweater and dark trousers, the armor of the unremarkable. My parents lived in a gated enclave in Palo Alto. The neighborhood was engineered to project an aura of effortless prosperity. Manicured hedges lined the winding streets, and the ambient noise was nothing but the hum of high-end electric engines and the faint spray of hidden irrigation systems. I parked my modest sedan in the wide driveway, slotting it between my father's imported luxury SUV and Liam's sleek sports car. When I pushed open the heavy oak front door, the scent of roasted rosemary and expensive lavender diffusers hit me. The house was pristine, staged like a photograph in an architectural magazine, yet it always felt hollow. I walked down the arched hallway and entered the formal dining room. They were already seated. Liam sat at the center of the long mahogany table, projecting casual confidence. He wore a crisp linen shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing the silver face of a watch that cost more than my annual rent. Elise sat beside him. Her posture was impeccable, her sharp eyes taking in the room with the quiet calculation of a trained financial officer. My mother, Susan, fluttered around the sideboard, arranging porcelain serving dishes. My father, William, sat at the head of the table. William looked different than he had at the wedding. The tailored tuxedo had masked the subtle deterioration of his frame. Sitting in the harsh light of the dining room chandelier, his skin carried a gray undertone. Shadows pooled beneath his eyes. "Right on time," Susan said, her voice carrying that practiced melodic pitch she used when company was present. "Sit down, Ava. Liam was just telling us about the final phase of the Sterling acquisition." I took the empty seat across from my brother. I unfolded my linen napkin and placed it in my lap. I did not offer a congratulatory smile. I simply waited. The dinner commenced with the usual synchronized performance. Susan poured sparkling water and praised Liam for his visionary leadership. Liam leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine, and offered modest, rehearsed deflections that only served to highlight his own perceived brilliance. Elise contributed polite agreements, though I noticed her gaze frequently darting toward her husband, observing the slight tremor in his fingers when he gripped his glass. The pleasantries lasted through the salad course. Then the interrogation began. Liam set his fork down and leaned forward, resting his forearms on the polished wood. "So, Ava," he offered a tight, artificial smile, "you disappeared pretty quickly the other night. Marcus is a heavy hitter. People in my circle spend years trying to get 5 minutes of his time. What did he want to talk to you about?" He framed it as a casual inquiry, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. He was fishing for data packets. "He asked about my background," I said evenly. I sliced a piece of roasted chicken and brought it to my mouth. The meat was dry. "Your background," Liam repeated. He let out a short, dismissive laugh. He looked at Elise, seeking an audience for his condescension. What, did he want a tutorial on running server maintenance for mid-tier data centers? Susan laughed softly, a nervous sound designed to smooth the rough edges of Liam's mockery. "Now, Liam, Ava does very reliable work. It pays her bills." I did not react. I chewed my food, swallowed, and maintained eye contact with my brother. My silence unsettled him. In the past, this was the point where I would either defend my career or excuse myself from the table. By refusing to follow the established script, I was forcing him to sit in his own insecurity. "This is an important month for your brother," William interjected. I turned my attention to the head of the table. My father was staring at me, his jaw set. He reached up and rubbed the center of his chest, right over his sternum, his fingers pressing hard into the fabric of his shirt. "The Sterling merger is entering the final stage of due diligence," William continued. "The stakes are astronomical. Liam is operating in a very delicate orbit right now, Ava. The last thing we need is any unnecessary turbulence. Do not interfere in his orbit." I watched his hand massage his chest. His breathing was shallow. "Are you feeling unwell?" I asked. William dropped his hand quickly, looking annoyed that I had noticed the gesture. "Just stress. My blood pressure has been spiking. The real estate market is tight, and cash flow requires precise timing right now. A lot of capital is tied up in investments. We all need to focus on crossing the finish line." I cataloged that piece of information. Cash flow requires precise timing. Capital tied up in investments. A healthy commercial real estate broker did not complain about liquid capital during a celebratory family dinner, unless the pressure was crushing him. The data point connected perfectly with the bleeding Nevada shell company I had found on my monitors that morning. I looked back at Liam. His artificial smile had vanished. He was watching me with naked apprehension. Marcus just wanted a second opinion, I said, keeping my tone conversational. A second opinion on what? Liam pressed. His voice grew sharper, the polished tech founder facade cracking to reveal the terrified boy underneath. You do not know anything about artificial intelligence. You do not know anything about venture scaling. What could you possibly tell Marcus Sterling? I set my knife and fork down on the edges of my porcelain plate. They made a soft, definitive clink. I wiped the corners of my mouth with the linen napkin. I looked directly into Liam's eyes, letting the silence stretch until the air in the dining room felt heavy and suffocating. He wanted my opinion on network integrity, I said. Specifically, the processing load required to sustain automated container orchestration for synthetic cyclical routing. The dining room went dead silent. Liam's hand, which had been reaching for his wine glass, froze in midair. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin the color of old parchment. His eyes widened, reflecting a sudden, profound terror. Automated container orchestration for synthetic cyclical routing. It was the exact technical architecture required to run a massive bot farm. It was the exact phrase hidden in the back end of his fraudulent user acquisition logs. He knew the phrase. He knew exactly what it meant. And in that frozen second, he realized that I was already inside his system. He realized I had seen the ghost servers. He realized the hollow shell of his entire empire was sitting in the palm of my hand. Elise looked at her husband, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Liam," she asked softly, "are you all right?" He could not answer her. He could not even blink. He just stared at me, his breath hitching in his throat. William frowned, oblivious to the technical terminology, but highly attuned to the sudden shift in the room's atmospheric pressure. What does that mean? What is she talking about, Liam? I pushed my chair back and stood up. The legs scraped against the hardwood floor. "It is just shop talk, Dad," I said, my voice smooth and unbothered. "Nothing you need to worry your blood pressure over." I placed my napkin on the table. Susan stared at me, sensing the danger, but lacking the vocabulary to understand it. "Thank you for the dinner," I said, maintaining polite, unwavering eye contact with my terrified brother. The chicken was memorable. I turned and walked out of the dining room. I did not look back. I walked down the arched hallway, opened the heavy oak door, and stepped out into the cool night air. The psychological trap had been set and triggered with flawless precision. I started my car and drove away from the gated enclave, leaving Liam trapped at a table with his new wife and his suffocating father. He knew the truth was out. He knew I held the leverage. Ava has set a psychological trap, but Liam is desperate. What will a cornered golden child do next? The drive back from Palo Alto felt disjointed, a blur of highway street lamps painting yellow streaks across my windshield. The dinner had served its exact purpose. Liam was rattled, off balance, and bleeding the artificial confidence he relied upon. I walked into my apartment, dropped my keys onto the granite counter, and went straight to my home office. I woke the screens. The Nevada Shell Company routing data was still sitting there, a glowing digital paper trail of impending financial ruin. But the diverted money was only half the equation. I needed to understand what Liam was actually selling to Marcus Sterling. What was the core product hiding behind the curtain of the bot farm? I bypassed the synthetic user logs and navigated straight to the root directory of Aegis Logistics. This was the vaulted sanctuary of the startup, the proprietary source code Liam paraded in front of venture capitalists as a logistical revolution. I opened the main algorithmic engine. Line after line of syntax scrolled down the center screen. At first glance, it looked like a standard machine learning framework, layered with flashy user interface commands and bloated API integrations. It was dressed up, painted over by developers paid to make it look expensive and complex. But I am an architect. I do not look at the fresh coat of paint. I look at the studs. I look at the load-bearing equations. I started stripping away the cosmetic code, peeling back the front-end interface layers to expose the foundational logic underneath. The deeper I went, the more familiar the rhythm became. The way the data packets were sorted, the specific loop constraints, the elegant, minimalist logic gates dictating the primary route optimization. I stopped scrolling. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I pulled up the anomaly I had flagged earlier that morning, the hidden comment tag, Protocol 0. I had assumed Liam's development team scraped it from an open-source repository I contributed 2 years ago. I was wrong. I opened another window and pulled the core logic matrix of Aegis Logistics. I ran a comparative analysis against my own early coding syntax, the frameworks I built in my 20s. The structure matched. The error handling protocols matched. Even the specific structural flaws I used to make when I was 25 matched perfectly. The memory surfaced with striking clarity, sharp and entirely uninvited. 3 years ago, before Aegis Logistics existed, Liam and I briefly shared a co-working space in a converted warehouse downtown. I was consulting, building complex routing frameworks on a silver external hard drive. It held 2 years of my proprietary work, raw architecture I planned to patent. One Tuesday afternoon, my primary terminal froze. The silver drive registered a fatal partition error. I spent 10 hours trying to salvage the data, a tight, cold panic gripping my chest, until the drive simply stopped spinning. It was dead. Liam had walked into the office carrying 2 coffees. He watched me stare at the black screen. He had placed a hand on my shoulder, projecting the perfect image of a supportive older brother. "It happens to the best of us, Ava," he had said. "Hardware fails. Do not beat yourself up over it." He offered to take the corrupted drive to a specialized electronic waste facility in the city, saving me the trip so I could start rebuilding. I handed him the silver rectangle. I handed him 2 years of my life. Sitting in the glow of my monitors, the truth locked into place. He never took it to the recycling center. He took it to a cheap development firm. He paid someone to crack the corrupted partition, extract my raw, brilliant architecture, and polish it just enough to secure his first round of seed funding. Liam did not build Aegis Logistics. He stole it from the sister he deemed a failure. The financial fraud was a corporate crime. It was a desperate move to secure a buyout. But this was an intimate, calculated betrayal. He had stolen my intellect, paraded it as his own genius, and used the resulting status to humiliate me at every family gathering. He built his pedestal out of my stolen labor, and then had the audacity to stand on it and ask me why I was not climbing higher. The cold, detached professionalism I prided myself on began to fracture. It did not shatter into chaos. It crystallized into a sharp, focused wrath. My pulse steadied, slowing into a deliberate rhythm. I opened a fresh extraction protocol. I began mirroring the proprietary source code, placing it side by side with my original time-stamped backups archived on my private cloud server. I highlighted the stolen logic loops. I mapped the exact matches. I was going to hand Marcus Sterling a dossier that would not just kill the acquisition, it would erase Liam's name from the tech industry entirely. I checked the clock on the bottom corner of my screen. 11:58. The silence of my apartment was absolute, save for the low hum of the processor fans pushing heat away from the motherboard. I highlighted the final directory and prepared to initiate the secure export. A heavy, jarring impact shuddered through my front door. I flinched, my hand slipping off the mouse. The sound echoed down the narrow hallway of my apartment, disrupting the quiet sanctuary of my workspace. It was not a polite knock. It was a closed fist striking solid wood with desperate force. The impact came again, louder this time, rattling the brass deadbolt in its frame. My pulse spiked. I glanced back at the digital clock. Midnight. The digital war I had been waging all day had just bridged the gap into physical reality. The trap I set at the dinner table had triggered a faster reaction than I calculated. I stood up, pushing the ergonomic chair back. The heavy strikes continued, relentless and demanding, shaking the door hinges. The digital war has just arrived on my doorstep. Who is on the other side of the door? The pounding continued, a frantic rhythm vibrating through the floorboards of my apartment. I walked down the narrow hallway, my bare feet silent against the hardwood. I did not rush. Panic dictates speed, and I was not the one panicking. I reached the entryway and pressed my eye against the glass lens of the peephole. The fisheye distortion warped the hallway outside, but the figure pacing in front of my threshold was unmistakable. It was Liam. He looked nothing like the polished executive who had commanded the dining room table just hours earlier. The tailored linen shirt was wrinkled, the top buttons torn open as if he had been struggling to breathe. He dragged a hand through his carefully styled hair, ruining the expensive cut. Sweat glistened under the harsh fluorescent lights of the apartment corridor. He raised his fist to strike the wood again. I turned the brass latch and pulled the door open just enough to fill the frame. I did not unhook the chain guard. I placed my shoulder against the edge, turning my body into a physical barrier. "What do you want?" I asked. My voice was calm, a stark contrast to the erratic energy radiating from him. He jolted, startled by the sudden opening. He stepped forward, trying to use his height to force his way into my space. The chain pulled taut, stopping him inches from my face. He exhaled, and the smell of expensive scotch and raw fear washed over me. "Open the door, Ava," he demanded. His voice lacked the smooth baritone he used for venture capital pitches. It was thin, reedy, and vibrating with suppressed hysteria. "We need to talk right now." "We are talking," I replied, keeping my hands resting loosely by my sides. "State your business." He let out a short, jagged laugh. He looked up and down the empty hallway, paranoid that a neighbor might be listening. "What game are you playing?" he hissed, leaning closer to the gap. "You show up at my wedding," you whisper in Marcus Sterling's ear, "and then you sit at my dinner table, throwing around network terminology like some kind of threat. What did you say to him?" I remained silent. In any interrogation, silence is the heaviest weapon. People will rush to fill the void, and in their rush, they reveal their true baseline. Liam could not handle the quiet. His eyes darted across my face, searching for a tell, a flinch, a sign of the submissive sister he had spent a lifetime conditioning. He found nothing. The absence of my reaction infuriated him. He pivoted to his default strategy, intimidation disguised as condescension. "You think you are so clever," he sneered, gripping the doorframe. His knuckles turned white. "You sit in this dark little box staring at screens, and you think you understand how the real world operates. You have always been delusional. Ever since we were kids, you live in a fantasy where hard work actually matters. It does not. Optics matter. Relationships matter. I built an empire while you were debugging mainframes for hourly wages." He leaned closer, his breath hot against the crack in the doorway. "You are trying to sabotage the biggest deal of my life because you are jealous. You cannot stand the fact that Elise chose me. You cannot stand the fact that Dad respects me. You are a bitter, lonely failure, Ava. And if you try to ruin this merger with whatever petty technical glitch you think you found, I will make sure you never work in the tech sector again. I have investors. I have lawyers. I will crush you." I listened to the tirade, mapping the emotional trajectory of his words. It was classic gaslighting. Attack the credibility, project the insecurity, and threaten the livelihood. 5 years ago, those words would have found a vulnerability. They would have made me question my own sanity. Tonight, they sounded like a predictable algorithm executing a faulty command. "Are you finished?" I asked. He blinked, thrown off balance by the lack of defense. He opened his mouth to launch another threat, but I cut him off. "I did not go hunting for glitches, Liam. I was asked to conduct a shadow audit. I pulled the packet data for your user acquisition metrics." His jaw locked. A muscle jumped near his temple. "You do not have 40,000 new enterprise clients," I continued, my tone flat and measured. You have a cyclical bot farm running automated container orchestration. You are masking synthetic traffic to inflate your daily active user count. His eyes widened, the pupils dilating in the dim light of the hallway. He tried to speak, but only a dry rasp escaped his throat. And synthetic traffic costs capital, I said, driving the final nail into the structure of his lies. You ran out of seed funding months ago. So every Friday, you wire the hosting fees through a clearinghouse in Delaware. I tilted my head, locking my gaze onto his terrified eyes. Account ending in 7742, I recited. Desert Sky Holdings, Henderson, Nevada. The number struck him with the force of physical blows. The remaining color drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent gray. His hands fell away from the doorframe. The bluster, the arrogance, the polished tech founder persona evaporated into the stagnant air. He was no longer the apex predator of the family. He was a cornered thief, staring at the person who held the ledger. He stepped back, his chest heaving as he struggled to pull oxygen into his lungs. He looked at the floor, then back at me. The aggressive posture dissolved, replaced by a pathetic, crumbling submission. He pivoted to the last resort of a guilty man. He played the victim. "Ava, please," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You do not understand the pressure. You do not know what it is like to have Dad breathing down your neck, expecting perfection. The investors wanted metrics. The board wanted growth. I just needed a head start." "A head start," I repeated, testing the absurdity of the phrase. "Yes," he pleaded, stepping closer again, his hands open in supplication. "Just a temporary boost to secure the next round of funding. Once the Sterling buyout clears, I was going to shut the Ghost servers down. I was going to use Marcus's capital to hire real developers and build the actual product. No one would have ever known." "You could not build the actual product," I stated, slicing through his justification, "because you do not know how. You never did." He swallowed hard, shaking his head. "That is not true. I know about the external hard drive, Liam." The air in the hallway seemed to freeze. He froze with it. 3 years ago, I said, my voice dropping to a low, unforgiving register, you offered to recycle my corrupted drive. You took my proprietary routing architecture. You paid someone to crack the partition, and you used my foundational logic to launch Aegis Logistics. You built your pedestal out of my stolen labor. Tears welled in his eyes, a desperate, manipulative display of remorse. "Ava, I knew your code was brilliant. I knew it could change the industry. You were never going to commercialize it. You hide from the spotlight. I took it because I knew how to sell it. We are a team. We are family." "Do not use that word," I warned, the coldness in my tone finally reflecting the wrath simmering beneath my surface. Family does not steal. Family does not introduce their sister as a failure to elevate their own status. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the edge of the door. "Please, Ava, if Marcus finds out, he will cancel the acquisition. He will file an SEC report. I will go to prison. Elise will leave me. You would be destroying my entire life." I studied his face, cataloging the terror, the desperation, the profound lack of accountability. He still believed he was the victim of circumstance. He still believed I owed him my silence. "I am not destroying anything, Liam," I said. "Gravity does not care about family loyalty. You built a skyscraper on a cracked foundation. The collapse is a mathematical certainty. I am just the person holding the structural report." I unhooked the chain guard, causing him to step back in anticipation. Then I grabbed the edge of the door and swung it shut. "No, wait!" he shouted, thrusting his hand forward. The heavy wood slammed closed, missing his fingers by a fraction of an inch. I turned the deadbolt, the loud metallic clank echoing through my entryway. I engaged the security chain and took a step back, breathing in the quiet air of my apartment. I moved toward the peephole and looked through the glass lens. Liam stood in the hallway for a long, agonizing minute. His head hung low, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The reality of his impending ruin weighed down on him. But then, the posture of defeat shifted. His head snapped up, his jaw clenched, the muscles working furiously under the skin. The despair evaporated, replaced by a cornered, toxic malice. He realized begging would not work. He realized I could not be manipulated. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his smartphone. His thumb moved rapidly across the illuminated screen, his face twisted in a mask of pure, vindictive focus. He was not looking for a solution. He was looking for a weapon. He was initiating a preemptive strike. I watched his thumb tap the screen, wondering what lie he was crafting. How will he ruin me first? I stepped away from the peephole and walked back into my home office. The glow of the monitors provided the only light in the room. I sat down in my ergonomic chair and checked the time. 12:14 in the morning. The confrontation had lasted less than 15 minutes, but the parameters of the conflict had shifted entirely. Liam was not going to wait for Marcus Sterling to ask for my report. A cornered animal strikes first, and Liam's primary weapon had always been his ability to control the narrative. I opened a secure communication channel linked to the shadow audit protocol Marcus had established. Within 20 minutes, the first incoming message arrived. It was an alert from the automated threat monitoring system I had set up on Aegis Logistics' external communications. The system tracked outgoing emails sent to the Sterling Logistics corporate domain. A high-priority email had just cleared the Aegis servers, flagged with the subject line, "Urgent personnel warning regarding Ava James." The sender was Liam. The recipient was the Chief of Human Resources at Sterling Logistics, with a blind copy sent directly to Marcus's executive assistant. I initiated a packet interception and decrypted the email body. I read the text on my center screen, mapping the architecture of my brother's smear campaign. It was a masterpiece of corporate character assassination. Liam did not sound angry or vindictive in the email. He sounded deeply concerned, adopting the tone of a burdened brother forced to make a difficult professional decision. He claimed that I was a disgruntled former contractor who had recently suffered a severe mental health crisis. He stated that I harbored a delusional fixation on his success and was known to fabricate data to damage reputations. He strongly advised the Sterling executive team to disregard any communication or unsolicited audits I might submit, citing a history of erratic behavior and vindictive sabotage. He was framing me as a liability before I could frame him as a fraud. He knew that in the high-stakes environment of a 9-figure merger, corporate legal teams err on the side of caution. If HR flagged me as a potential lawsuit risk or a compromised source, Marcus might be forced to dismiss my findings entirely to protect his own due diligence process. The strategy was ruthless, but it relied on a critical flaw in Liam's logic. He assumed I was playing the same social game he was. He assumed I would react to the smear campaign by panicking, calling Marcus to defend myself, or initiating a messy public dispute to clear my name. I did none of those things. When someone attacks your credibility, defending yourself only validates their premise. Instead of fighting the narrative, I used it. I needed unshakable, legally binding proof of Liam's direct involvement in the bot farm. The Nevada shell company routing numbers proved the fraud existed, but Liam could always blame a rogue chief financial officer or a corrupt developer. He had insulated himself from the daily operational code. To pin the entire structure to him, I needed an action executed directly from his master administrator account. I needed his digital fingerprint on the crime. To get that, I had to make him drop his guard. I had to give him a victory. I had to let him believe his smear campaign had worked and that my audit had been reduced to a desperate, petty grievance. I opened the formal due diligence portal Marcus had provided. This portal was visible to the Aegis executive team, including Liam. I bypassed the critical server logs and navigated to the most trivial, mundane section of the corporate ledger, the executive expense accounts. Liam treated his corporate card like a personal slush fund. It was an open secret in his orbit, but venture capitalists rarely scrutinized dinner receipts, when a company claimed exponential growth. I pulled his transaction history for the past 6 months and initiated a targeted filter. I found exactly what I needed within 3 minutes. A series of exorbitant charges originating from a luxury resort in the Maldives, billed during a week Liam claimed to be at a supply chain conference in Berlin. The charges included private yacht charters, premium champagne service, and a rather expensive spa package. It was a textbook compliance violation, embezzlement on a micro scale. In the context of a 9-figure merger, it was a rounding error. But to a narcissistic founder obsessed with his public image, it was a profound embarrassment. I drafted a formal compliance anomaly report within the due diligence portal. I attached the Maldives receipts, highlighted the date discrepancies, and flagged the transactions as unauthorized personal luxury expenses, requiring immediate executive review. I did not mention the bot farm. I did not mention the ghost servers. I framed the entire inquiry around a few $1,000s in stolen champagne. I clicked submit. The alert pinged across the Aegis network, landing directly in Liam's administrative inbox. This was the red herring. I sat back and visualized the sequence of events about to unfold in Liam's mind. He would see the anomaly report. He would read the accusation regarding the Maldives trip. The initial shock would quickly dissolve into arrogant relief. He would assume that this petty expense violation was the limit of my audit. He would conclude that my grand threat at his apartment door was a bluff, and that I lacked the technical skill to find the bot farm. Most importantly, he would believe that his smear campaign had successfully discredited me, forcing me to grasp at straws to validate my role. He would laugh off the Maldives report as the desperate act of a jealous, mentally unstable sister trying to cause a minor inconvenience. But Liam's ego would not allow a blemish on his record, no matter how small. He would want the anomaly erased before Marcus Sterling's legal team reviewed the finalized expense ledgers in the morning. He would want to bury the receipts to maintain the illusion of absolute perfection. To bury those receipts, Liam could not use a standard developer account. The due diligence portal required top-tier authorization to modify flagged compliance files. He would have to log in using his master admin credentials, the God Mode token that granted unrestricted access to the entire Aegis infrastructure. When a user logs in with a master token, the internal firewall protocols briefly lower their shields to allow the encrypted handshake. It creates a microsecond window of vulnerability in the core server architecture, a window that a skilled data architect can exploit. I opened a secondary terminal, bypassing the formal portal, and parked my digital presence right outside the Aegis master firewall. I typed a string of executable code, building a silent packet sniffer designed to piggyback on the next master admin login. I did not need to break the door down. I just needed Liam to open it from the inside. I watched the digital clock on my screen. 12:47. The silence in the apartment felt different now. It was not the calm of isolation. It was the tense, coiled silence of a predator waiting in the brush. If Liam ignored the expense report, the trap would fail. I would have to find another way to prove his direct culpability, and the ticking clock to the merger would run out. But I knew my brother. I knew his vanity. He could not leave a flaw uncorrected. At 1:12 in the morning, the terminal screen flickered. A new connection request hit the Aegis external node. The IP address originated from a luxury loft in downtown San Francisco. Liam's loft. The authorization protocol initiated, requesting access to the executive financial ledgers. The prompt appeared on my screen. Master admin token verified. He took the bait. He was logging in to delete his petty theft, entirely unaware that he was handing me the keys to his empire. My fingers flew across the keyboard, executing the piggyback script. The code slipped through the lowered firewall, attaching itself to his encrypted session. I was in the core servers. The download progress bar appeared on my monitor. I needed 3 minutes to extract the foundational logs proving his master token had authorized the bot farm payments. 3 minutes of uninterrupted access before the firewall reset. Liam takes the bait and logs into the system. Will I get the access I need before the merger closes? The progress bar on my center monitor filled with agonizing slowness. 1%, 4%, 9%. Liam was currently navigating the executive ledgers, deleting the Maldives receipts and modifying the timestamps on his corporate expense account. He thought he was covering his tracks. He had no idea my extraction script was silently riding the wake of his master admin token, pulling the encrypted logs of the ghost servers directly from the root directory. 22%. I needed to move faster. Once Liam finished modifying the expense files, he would log out, terminating the master session and slamming the firewall shut, trapping my extraction script inside. While the primary download crawled forward, I opened a secondary terminal. I used the temporary admin access to bypass the Aegis internal network entirely, pivoting my focus back to the Nevada shell company, Desert Sky Holdings. The financial architecture was the final missing piece of the puzzle. I had the stolen code. I had the bot farm traffic logs. But to present Marcus Sterling with an undeniable case, I needed to expose the origin of the capital funding the fraud. If Liam was broke and the venture capital was exhausted, where was the money coming from? I traced the weekly wire transfers originating from the Nevada P.O. box backward through the banking clearinghouse. The metadata had been stripped, but Liam's developers were lazy. They had used the same encryption key for the reverse routing that they used for the primary server access. I applied the decryption key, and the digital fog cleared. The originating account number appeared on my screen. It did not belong to an offshore angel investor. It did not belong to a shadow venture capital firm willing to take a high-risk gamble on a failing tech startup. The routing prefix belonged to a regional commercial bank based in Northern California. I initiated a query into the bank's public loan registration database, cross-referencing the account number with recent commercial real estate filings. The query processed in less than 10 seconds. A PDF document generated on my right monitor. It was a formal deed of trust, publicly filed with the county clerk's office 6 months ago. I read the text at the top of the document. Then I read it again. The breath caught in my throat. My hands stopped moving over the keyboard. The originating account did not belong to Liam. The account was linked to a high-yield, variable-rate second mortgage. The collateral listed on the deed of trust included a portfolio of 3 commercial properties located in San Jose and Palo Alto. I knew those properties. I knew the addresses by heart. They were the foundational assets of my father's commercial real estate brokerage. They were the buildings William had spent 30 years acquiring, the physical manifestation of the family legacy he was so desperate to protect. The borrower listed on the second mortgage was William James. The numbers on the screen locked together, forming a picture so devastating, I had to push my chair back from the desk to absorb the impact. Liam was not acting alone. He never was. When the venture capital ran dry and the bot farm threatened to go dark, Liam had gone to our father. He had confessed that Aegis Logistics was a hollow shell. He had admitted the user metrics were fake and that the impending acquisition by Marcus Sterling was built on a lie. And William, the patriarch who preached the gospel of hard work and integrity, had not shut the fraud down. He had not forced Liam to take accountability. Instead, he had walked into a bank, signed his name on a second mortgage, and leveraged the family's entire financial foundation to secretly bankroll a criminal enterprise. William was funding the Nevada Shell Company. William was paying the server fees to keep the fake traffic looping. He had sacrificed his own legacy to buy his son a fake empire, gambling everything on the assumption that the Sterling buyout would clear before the variable rate mortgage crushed them. The conversation at the dinner table echoed in my mind. William rubbing his chest, the spike in his blood pressure. Cash flow requires precise timing right now. A lot of capital is tied up in investments. He was not stressed about the real estate market. He was buckling under the terror of a federal crime. If the merger failed, Liam would go to prison, but William would lose the properties. The family would be bankrupt, their performative wealth exposed as an empty facade. The betrayal shifted, expanding from a singular act of sibling rivalry into a profound, systemic rot. This was not just about Liam stealing my code and mocking my career. This was about a family architecture designed to protect the golden child at any cost, even if that cost meant financial suicide. My parents had looked at Liam, a charismatic thief, and decided he was worth risking their entire future. They looked at me, a brilliant architect, and decided I was a failure to be hidden at the back table of a wedding. A cold, heavy clarity settled over me. The anger evaporated, replaced by the clinical precision of a surgeon standing over a terminal patient. I was no longer fighting an arrogant brother. I was dismantling a corrupt family system. A sharp chime sounded from the center monitor. Extraction complete. I glanced at the progress bar. 100%. I had the master admin logs. I had the digital signature linking Liam directly to the bot farm authorization. In the secondary terminal, the Aegis session timed out. Liam had finished deleting his Maldives receipts and logged off, unaware that his brief connection had finalized his own destruction. The firewall slammed shut. The microsecond window closed. But I was already out. I compiled the extracted data, the stolen code comparisons, and the Nevada shell company routing numbers into a single encrypted directory. Then I added the PDF of William's second mortgage. The dossier was complete. It was a weapon of absolute, indisputable truth. I leaned back and looked at the digital clock, 2:14 in the morning. The city outside my window was dark and silent. My phone vibrated on the desk. The caller ID displayed my mother's name, Susan. A call at this hour meant the panic had spread. Liam had likely told them about the confrontation at my door. He had likely spun a new narrative, framing me as an unstable threat to their delicate house of cards. They were circling the wagons, preparing to deploy the final layer of emotional manipulation to force my compliance. I watched the phone vibrate across the matte surface, the quiet buzzing sound filling the room. I am not just fighting an arrogant brother anymore. I have to dismantle my own father's financial ruin. What is my next move? The phone vibrated across the matte surface of my desk, a persistent mechanical hum in the quiet of my apartment. The caller ID displayed my mother's name, 2:14 in the morning. I watched the screen glow for several seconds, mapping the tactical purpose of the call before I reached out and accepted the connection. I brought the receiver to my ear and said nothing. "Ava," Susan whispered. Her voice carried a practiced, fragile tremor. It was a specific pitch she had perfected over decades, designed to disarm, to invoke pity, and to shift the burden of responsibility onto whoever was listening. For most of my life, that sound had functioned as an invisible tether, pulling me back into compliance whenever I dared to step out of my assigned role. "Are you there?" she asked, a soft sob catching in her throat. "I am listening, Mom," I replied, my tone flat, providing no emotional traction for her to grip. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, the tears flowing freely now, wet and ragged over the digital connection. "Why are you trying to destroy your brother's happiness? We are family, Ava. We are supposed to protect each other." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, my eyes scanning the glowing PDF of my father's second mortgage displayed on the right monitor. The hypocrisy of her plea hung in the air. "Did Liam tell you what I found?" I asked. "He came to the house an hour ago," Susan said, her breath hitching. "He is in pieces, Ava. He told us you are auditing his company. He said you found some technical errors and you are threatening to take them to Marcus Sterling. He is terrified. Elise is asleep upstairs and he is sitting in the kitchen crying. You are ruining the most important week of his life over some minor computer glitch." I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second. The narrative had already been rewritten. Liam had not confessed to the bot farm. He had not confessed to the Nevada shell company. He had run home to his enablers and painted himself as the victim of a vindictive sister weaponizing a trivial error. "It is not a minor glitch, Mom," I said. "He is faking his user data. The entire startup is a ghost town." Every new business takes time to find its footing, she argued swiftly, her defense mechanism triggering without hesitation. He just needs this merger to go through so he can hire more people. You know how the tech world works. Everyone exaggerates a little bit until they get established. Why do you always have to be so rigid? Why cannot you just let him have this victory? The defense was too smooth. The pivot was too fast. A cold realization washed over me, settling deep into my chest. She was not shocked by the concept of Liam fabricating his success. She was only shocked that I was refusing to look away. "How long have you known?" I asked. "Known what?" she deflected, her voice tightening. I looked at the mortgage document on my screen. The date of the filing was 6 months ago. William could not encumber 3 commercial properties without his wife's signature on the secondary loan documents. California is a community property state. Susan had to sign the paperwork. "You signed the deed of trust, Mom. You knew Dad leveraged the commercial properties to keep Aegis Logistics afloat. You knew Liam was out of capital half a year ago, and you both risked your own financial survival to hide his failure." Silence fell over the line. The crying stopped. The fragile tremor vanished, replaced by the heavy, shallow breathing of a woman who had just been stripped of her favorite disguise. Enablers do not wield swords. They wield guilt. They cushion the favored child by sacrificing the scapegoat, and they build their entire identity around the illusion of domestic perfection. Susan knew Liam was a fraud. She knew the empire was fake. But she preferred the comfortable lie over the ugly truth. She preferred the catered weddings and the country club prestige, even if it meant living on the edge of a financial precipice. "Your father is under an immense amount of pressure," Susan said, her tone shifting from sorrow to a cold, defensive whisper. "The real estate market shifted. We did what we had to do to bridge the gap until the buyout clears. When Marcus signs those papers, Liam will pay us back. Everything will be fine. Everything will be perfect. Unless you open your mouth." I sat in the dark, listening to the desperate rationalization of a woman who had traded her integrity for an aesthetic. "If Marcus Sterling buys a hollow asset, the SEC will investigate," I explained, keeping my voice clinical, dissecting the reality she refused to acknowledge. "When they find the ghost servers, they will trace the funding. They will find the Nevada Shell Company. They will find Dad's mortgage. It is wire fraud, Mom. It is investor deception. If I stay quiet, I am complicit. If I stay quiet, Elise marries a man who is about to be indicted." "You do not care about Elise," Susan hissed, the venom finally breaking through the maternal facade. "You are just jealous. You have always resented him. You want us to lose everything just to prove a point." The emotional umbilical cord, frayed and degraded over 33 years of neglect, finally snapped. I felt nothing but a profound, liberating emptiness. "I am not breaking this family, Mom," I said. "I am just handing you the receipt for what you bought." I pressed the end call button. The screen went dark. The silence of the apartment rushed back in, clean and undisputed. I turned my attention back to the center monitor. While I had been on the phone, the extraction software had finished parsing the final encrypted logs from Liam's panicked login session. The red herring had paid off in ways even I had not fully anticipated. When Liam used his master admin token to override the compliance portal and delete his luxury expense reports, the Aegis system architecture required an automatic synchronization check. To alter a financial ledger, the master token had to verify its credentials against the active server state. Liam had rushed the process. He had bypassed the standard security protocols to scrub the Maldives receipts as fast as possible. In doing so, his irrevocable digital signature had been permanently stamped onto the active session logs. Those session logs included the corrupted directory housing the bot farm traffic. He had inadvertently left a glowing, undeniable fingerprint on the exact sector of the network where the fake traffic lived. He could no longer claim ignorance. He could no longer blame a rogue developer or a careless financial officer. The metadata proved that the master administrator knew the ghost servers were active and chose to bypass them to hide a petty theft. I highlighted the synchronization log. I dragged the file into the primary dossier folder. I initiated the final encryption sequence. The progress bar zipped across the screen. A small prompt appeared, asking to finalize the package. I clicked the mouse. The button depressed with a quiet, satisfying snap. The file locked. The evidence was airtight. The digital architecture of Liam's ruin was now contained in a single, portable format. I spent the next few hours sitting in the ergonomic chair, watching the black sky outside my window slowly bleed into a bruised metallic blue. The fog rolling off the bay caught the early morning light. The city began to wake up. At 6 a.m, I stood up. I took a shower, letting the scalding water wash away the exhaustion of the night. I walked into my bedroom and opened the closet. I bypassed the casual tech wear and pulled out a sharp, charcoal-tailored suit. It was understated, tailored to fit perfectly, offering no unnecessary flourishes. It was the armor of a professional auditor. I tied my hair back, slid my feet into polished black heels, and picked up my encrypted tablet. The dossier rested securely on the solid-state drive, waiting for an audience. The Sterling acquisition meeting was scheduled for 9 o'clock at the corporate headquarters. I picked up my keys and walked out of my apartment, locking the door behind me. I rode the elevator down to the ground floor. The building was quiet, the usual morning foot traffic yet to begin. The polished marble floors of the lobby reflected the pale sunlight filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I adjusted my grip on the tablet and walked toward the glass exit doors, my mind already mapping the exact sequence of the upcoming boardroom presentation. As I approached the final pillar near the exit, the shadows shifted. A figure detached from the alcove near the security desk, stepping directly into my path. The silhouette blocked the morning light, forcing me to stop. I tightened my grip on the tablet. The final merger meeting was 2 hours away, but the physical confrontation had arrived early. The figure stepping out of the shadowed alcove was my father. William wore a tailored navy trench coat over a crisp charcoal suit, his silver hair combed back with meticulous care. Despite the early hour and the undeniable crisis unfolding within his household, he presented an image of unshakable control. He did not look like a man teetering on the edge of financial ruin. He looked like a chief executive arriving to close a routine negotiation. "You are up early, Ava," he said. His voice resonated through the empty marble lobby. It was the same deep, authoritative baritone he had used to govern our family for 3 decades. It was the voice that had dismissed my college acceptance letters as practical but uninspired. It was the voice that had toasted Liam's endless failures as stepping stones to greatness. I stopped walking. I kept my posture aligned, holding the encrypted tablet against my side. "I expected a delegation, Dad. Sending you alone feels like a tactical error." He offered a tight, patronizing smile. He closed the distance between us, his leather shoes clicking against the polished stone floor. "Your mother is at home. She is distressed. Your brother is currently trying to hold his life together. I came alone because this is not a family squabble anymore. This is a business discussion." He was attempting to shift the dynamic. By framing the encounter as a professional negotiation, he sought to strip away the emotional weight of his betrayal, reducing the impending catastrophe to a simple matter of leverage and compliance. I stood my ground, letting the morning light wash over us. There is no business to discuss. I am scheduled to present my findings to Marcus Sterling in less than 2 hours. William slipped his hands into the pockets of his trench coat. He tilted his head, studying me with a look of feigned disappointment. "Liam told me you found some anomalies in the server traffic. He mentioned you were getting worked up over some operational irregularities." I watched the muscles flex along his jawline. He was testing the waters, trying to gauge exactly how much data I possessed. "They are not irregularities," I corrected, my tone remaining clinical and devoid of heat. "It is a fabricated ecosystem. Liam is using a ghost server network to generate synthetic user metrics, and the Nevada shell company paying the hosting fees is being funded by the second mortgage you secretly took out on the San Jose and Palo Alto properties. The patronizing smile vanished from his face. A heavy, stagnant silence fell between us. The ambient hum of the lobby ventilation system suddenly seemed loud. I had laid my cards on the table, face up. I stripped away his plausible deniability. I forced him to look at the exact dimensions of his own corruption. He did not flinch. He did not deny it. He simply exhaled a long, measured breath, letting the facade of ignorance drop. "You always possessed a brilliant mind for details, Ava," he said, his voice lowering to a quiet, conspiratorial register. "You see the raw numbers. You see the ones and the zeros. But your flaw is that you lack vision. You do not understand how the world is actually built." I did not interrupt him. I let him construct his own trap. "Nobody starts at the top," he continued, pacing a few steps to his left, commandeering the physical space. "Every great empire requires a leap of faith. The tech industry is an ecosystem built on momentum. You project success to attract capital, and you use that capital to build the success you projected. It is a bridge loan on reality. You fake it until you make it." He stopped pacing and turned back to face me, his eyes hard and unyielding. Liam had a brilliant concept. He just needed time to scale. The venture funding dried up before the market could catch on. I provided the bridge to get him to the Sterling acquisition. When Marcus signs the papers today, the infusion of capital will make the entire company solvent. Liam will hire the developers to build the actual infrastructure. The synthetic traffic will be phased out. I will pay off the second mortgage. Everyone wins. He believed it. I could see the terrifying conviction in his eyes. He viewed the wire fraud, the intellectual property theft, and the investor deception as necessary strategic maneuvers. He had insulated his conscience with the delusion that the ends justified the criminal means. "It is fraud," I stated, slicing through his twisted monologue. "You are tricking a billionaire into purchasing a hollow shell. When Marcus discovers the asset is worthless, he will dismantle Liam. He will dismantle you." "Marcus will not discover anything unless you put it on his desk," William countered, taking a step closer, towering over me. "Which brings us to the purpose of my visit." He pulled his hands out of his coat pockets. The negotiation was ending. The ideological climax had arrived. He was ready to deploy the ultimate patriarch weapon. "You have a choice to make this morning, Ava." He pitched his words with surgical precision, ensuring each syllable carried maximum weight. "You can walk into that boardroom and hand Marcus whatever file you are holding. If you do that, you will destroy your brother. You will bankrupt your mother and me. And if you force that outcome, you are no longer a member of this family." He held my gaze, his expression carved from stone. "You will be dead to us. Your name will not be spoken in my house. You will be excised from the trust, erased from the legacy, and left to navigate the rest of your life as a stranger. You will have nothing." The threat hung in the cool lobby air. It was the deepest fear of any child, the threat of total abandonment. He expected me to shatter. He expected the ingrained conditioning of my youth to override my professional integrity. But I did not feel fear. I looked at the man who had just admitted to mortgaging his life to erase my achievements, and I felt nothing but a profound, liberating clarity. William let the silence stretch, allowing the threat to settle. Then he offered the bribe, the carrot following the stick. "But it does not have to end in a tragedy," he said, softening his tone, adopting the benevolent posture of a forgiving king. "Liam recognizes your talent. I recognize your talent. We know you feel overlooked. If you delete that file, if you walk into that room and give Aegis Logistics a clean bill of health, Liam is prepared to offer you a position." He smiled, a genuine, terrifying expression of victory. Chief Technology Officer of the newly merged Sterling Aegis Division, a mid-six-figure salary, equity options, a corner office. You will finally have the seat at the table you have always wanted. We will build the future together, as a family. I absorbed the offer. He was trying to buy my silence, using the very capital he was currently stealing from Marcus Sterling. He was offering me a prominent role on a sinking ship, disguised as a promotion. I tightened my grip on the encrypted tablet. "You think protecting a fraud is a business strategy," I said, my voice steady, cutting through the marble acoustics. "You think hiding a fatal structural flaw is a display of loyalty." His smile faltered. "A liability does not become an asset just because you put my name on the door," I continued. "You did not come here to offer me a seat at the table. You came here to ask me to hold the bag when the authorities finally come looking for the money." "Ava," he warned, a dark shadow crossing his features, "do not be foolish. I am offering you the world." "You are offering me handcuffs," I replied. "I am an auditor. My currency is the truth." I turned away from the glass exit doors, pivoting toward the subterranean parking garage access. I needed my car to get to the Sterling headquarters. "Where are you going?" he demanded, his voice cracking like a whip, the polished facade finally shattering. "I gave you an ultimatum. You walk out that door with that file, and you are done." I paused at the edge of the elevator bank and looked back at my father one last time. He stood in the center of the lobby, a desperate, fading king, watching his leverage evaporate into the morning light. "I am the auditor," I said, my voice echoing off the stone walls. "My job is to protect the deal." I pressed the call button. The steel doors slid open immediately. I stepped into the polished cab, turned around, and maintained eye contact with William as the doors slid shut, sealing him out of my sight. William stood alone in the lobby, his jaw clenched, his mind racing. He thought he had presented an inescapable binary choice. He thought he had secured my compliance with the weight of his authority. But as the elevator descended into the garage, a cold realization began to creep into his mind. What exactly did I mean by protecting the deal? The drive from my apartment to the Sterling Logistics headquarters took exactly 42 minutes. I utilized the time to compartmentalize the remnants of the lobby confrontation. The patriarch had fired his final weapon, severing the familial bond, and I had walked away intact. The emotional variables were now eliminated. Only the data remained. I pulled into the subterranean parking structure beneath the glass and steel monolith that housed Marcus Sterling's empire. The architecture was designed to project absolute transparency, a physical manifestation of corporate integrity. It was a fitting arena for the execution of a lie. I badged through security and rode the silent, high-speed elevator to the 47th floor. The doors parted to reveal an expansive reception area, lined with abstract modern art and manned by 2 assistants operating sleek, minimalist consoles. I gave my name. One of the assistants nodded and directed me toward the executive boardroom at the end of the corridor. The boardroom was a theater of corporate power. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered an uninterrupted, sweeping view of the Pacific Ocean. The morning sun glinted off the water, casting bright, shifting patterns across the polished surface of the massive mahogany conference table. In the center of the room, a discreet side table was staged with a dozen crystal champagne flutes and 2 bottles of vintage Dom Pérignon chilling in a silver bucket. The set pieces for a celebration were perfectly arranged. The principal actors were already present. Liam sat near the head of the table. He wore a bespoke Italian suit that fit with immaculate precision, projecting an aura of relaxed, unassailable success. To his immediate right sat William, the trench coat discarded, his posture rigid and commanding. Susan sat to Liam's left, wearing a designer dress and a smile so tightly drawn it looked painful. They had been invited for the ceremonial signing, the photo op that would solidify their status in the upper echelons of Silicon Valley society. Across from Liam sat Elise. Marcus's daughter was not smiling. She rested her hands on a closed leather portfolio, her sharp, intelligent eyes scanning the room. She was the chief financial officer of her father's division, and she carried the quiet, observant energy of a predator scanning for movement in the brush. I entered the room silently. I did not announce my presence. I walked to the far end of the long mahogany table, the position furthest from the champagne and the cameras, and pulled out a heavy leather chair. I sat down, placed my encrypted tablet on the table, and folded my hands. The soft click of my tablet hitting the wood drew their attention. Liam turned his head, his eyes locked onto me. A spectrum of micro-expressions flashed across his face. First, a spike of genuine panic, a reflex left over from the midnight confrontation at my door. Then, confusion. Finally, the panic evaporated, replaced by a slow, spreading smirk of triumphant arrogance. The dramatic irony saturating the room was thick enough to choke on. Liam looked at me and saw a defeated adversary. He believed his preemptive smear campaign to Marcus's HR department had successfully framed me as an unstable liability. He believed my presence here was a desperate, final attempt to cling to relevance. Most importantly, he believed William's ultimatum in the lobby had worked. He assumed I had accepted the bribe, choosing the fabricated chief technology officer role over the consequences of total banishment. He thought I was sitting at the far end of the table to witness his coronation and accept my newly assigned subservient position within his empire. William met my gaze briefly. He gave a microscopic, approving nod, confirming his own delusion that he had successfully bought my silence. Susan looked away, unwilling to acknowledge the tension, focusing instead on the champagne bucket. Liam leaned back in his chair, lacing his fingers together over his stomach. "Ava," he said, his voice loud enough to command the room. He infused the single word with a toxic blend of pity and condescension. "It is good of you to come. I know Dad mentioned you might want to observe the signing." I did not reply. I simply watched him. He unlaced his fingers and gestured vaguely toward the door. "However, the legal teams are about to finalize the transfer of the intellectual property assets. We are entering the confidential phase of the acquisition. This is a principals-only meeting." He offered an apologetic smile to Elise. "Family is important, but we have to respect the corporate protocols." He was attempting to publicly dismiss me before Marcus arrived, eager to eliminate the only variable he could not fully control. He wanted the photo op clean. "I need to ask you to wait in the reception area, Ava," Liam instructed, his tone hardening from a request into a directive. "We will bring you back in for the champagne toast." I did not move. I did not speak. I kept my eyes fixed on his, letting the silence stretch until his artificial smile began to falter. Liam shifted his weight, his irritation breaching the polished surface. "I am not asking, Ava. Please leave the room." The heavy glass doors at the front of the boardroom swung open. Marcus Sterling walked in. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly, the ambient energy realigning around the gravitational pull of the billionaire. He was flanked by 3 men carrying thick briefcases, the Sterling Logistics legal counsel. Marcus wore a dark suit, no tie, and an expression of absolute, unreadable calm. He walked to the head of the table, placing his phone face down on the wood. Liam immediately stood up, his irritation vanishing, replaced by eager deference. "Marcus, good morning." He extended his right hand, ready to execute the ceremonial handshake that would initiate the transfer of wealth. "We are all set here. The contracts are ready for your signature." Marcus Sterling did not take the offered hand. He looked at Liam's outstretched arm for a fraction of a second, then bypassed him entirely, pulling out the chair at the head of the table and sitting down. Liam's hand hung in the empty space. A flush of embarrassment crept up his neck. He slowly pulled his arm back and lowered himself into his seat, glancing at William for reassurance. William's jaw tightened. "Before we look at the contracts," Marcus began, his voice dropping the temperature in the room, "I want to clarify a few operational details regarding the Aegis network architecture." Liam forced a laugh, leaning forward, eager to reclaim the narrative. "Of course, Marcus. Happy to walk you through the high-level metrics again. The user acquisition flow is fully documented in the executive summary." Marcus raised a single hand, a silent command that stopped Liam mid-sentence. "I do not need the executive summary, Liam. I need the foundational audit." Marcus turned his head and looked down the length of the mahogany table, past the lawyers, past Elise, past my parents, locking his eyes onto mine. I asked an independent data auditor to run a shadow analysis on the raw packet data, Marcus announced to the room. The findings were submitted to my secure server early this morning. However, due to the nature of the anomalies discovered, I requested the auditor present the data in person, on the record, before any capital changes hands. Liam froze. The blood drained from his face at a terrifying speed. He looked at Marcus, then turned slowly to look at me. The smirk was gone. The delusion of victory was shattered. The reality of his nightmare was manifesting in real time. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket, produced a sleek black remote clicker for the boardroom projector, and slid it down the polished length of the table. The plastic device glided over the wood, stopping precisely in front of my encrypted tablet. "The floor is yours, Ava," Marcus said. I picked up the clicker. The plastic felt cold against my palm. I stood up, the legs of my heavy leather chair scraping against the carpet. I connected my tablet to the hidden port in the table. The massive digital screen dominating the far wall flared to life. The golden child's worst nightmare is realized. How will I execute the takedown? The screen behind me flared, casting a sharp blue light across the long mahogany table. It illuminated the dust motes suspended in the air and highlighted the sudden sheen of sweat forming on my brother's forehead. I did not clear my throat. I did not offer a preamble. The data required no introduction. "This is the executive summary submitted for due diligence," I began, my voice calm and analytical. The slide displayed a pristine graph showing a steep upward trajectory. Aegis Logistics claimed an acquisition rate of 40,000 new enterprise clients in the month of October alone. I pressed the clicker. The polished graph shattered into raw server logs, a dense cascade of IP addresses and query timestamps. "This is the reality," I said. I directed the legal team's attention to a specific cluster of accounts supposedly operating out of the Midwest. I explained the rhythm of the data. I pointed out the synchronization of the login times, the identical query durations, and the flawless mechanical intervals between sessions. They all initiated a route optimization query between 2 and 4 in the morning. They all let the query run for exactly 4.2 seconds. Then they logged out. "These are not human users," I stated, letting the words fall like stones onto the polished wood. "This is a synchronized bot farm, executing automated container orchestration." Liam pushed his chair back, the legs grinding harshly against the carpet. "Marcus, this is a gross mischaracterization." He pointed a trembling finger at the screen. "It is an industry-standard growth hacking technique. We simulate network load to stress test the user interface. It is a recognized scaling strategy." Marcus did not look at him. The lead legal counsel, a man with cold gray eyes and a tailored charcoal suit, raised a single index finger. "Do not interrupt the presentation, Mr. James," the lawyer instructed. The command was soft, but it carried the unyielding force of a gavel. Liam's mouth snapped shut. He sank back into his chair, the bespoke Italian suit suddenly looking 2 sizes too large. I pressed the clicker again. The screen transitioned from network logs to the decrypted financial gateways. "A simulated load test does not require a shadow corporation," I continued. "Synthetic traffic demands significant capital. Aegis Logistics depleted its initial venture funding 7 months ago. The company is currently generating 0 legitimate revenue." I highlighted the weekly wire transfers, tracing the path through the Delaware Clearinghouse to the regional bank in Henderson, Nevada. Hundreds of thousands of dollars are being funneled off the books to lease offshore server space, sustaining the illusion of client activity, I explained. "The asset you are attempting to acquire is fundamentally insolvent." I paused and let my gaze drift toward William. He sat frozen, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair so tightly his knuckles were stark white. He knew what I had omitted. I did not display the deed of trust. I did not expose his second mortgage to the Sterling legal team. I left the origin of the Nevada funds blank on the screen, a silent guillotine hanging exclusively over his neck. He realized in that moment that I possessed the blueprints to his financial ruin, and I was choosing to hold them in reserve. I pressed the clicker for the third time. Capital fraud invalidates the corporate valuation, I said, shifting the focus back to Marcus and his legal team. But intellectual property theft invalidates the product itself. The screen split into two columns. On the left, the core routing engine of Aegis Logistics. On the right, a time-stamped archive of my own proprietary code from 3 years prior. I walked the lawyers through the architecture. I highlighted the unique logic gates, the specific error handling protocols, and the identical structural flaws I had written when I was 25. The syntax was a perfect mirror. Then I magnified the central directory block. A single line of text filled the screen, glowing yellow against the dark background. //AJ_protocol_0. Protocol 0 was a personal naming convention I utilized during the development of my own logistical frameworks, I explained, the steady cadence of my voice slicing through the heavy silence of the boardroom. The code was stored on a physical drive my brother claimed to have recycled after a partition failure. The algorithmic engine driving Aegis Logistics was not developed by a visionary founder. It was extracted from my stolen hardware. You are attempting to purchase stolen goods. Susan gasped, a short, sharp intake of air. She covered her mouth with her trembling hand, staring at the screen, then at Liam. Elise turned her head, her sharp eyes boring into the side of her husband's face. The quiet calculation of the financial officer had transformed into the cold disgust of a woman who realized she was marrying a parasite. Liam shook his head, his breathing shallow and rapid. She is lying. He looked at Marcus, his voice cracking with desperation. She planted that. She hacked the system this morning to frame me. I pressed the clicker one final time. My brother anticipated this audit, I said, addressing Marcus directly. He initiated a preemptive communication to your Human Resources Department last night, suggesting my findings were the fabrication of an unstable mind. It is a defense relying on plausible deniability. He intends to argue that a rogue developer built the bot farm and embedded the stolen code without his knowledge. The final slide materialized. It was a stark, unformatted server session log. At 1:12 this morning, the Aegis master administrator logged into the core network to alter personal executive expense records, I said. I highlighted the timestamp and the encrypted cryptographic token. To execute that modification, the master token was forced to synchronize with the active server state. By bypassing the standard security protocols, the administrator permanently stamped an irrevocable digital signature onto the Active Directory. I zoomed in on the signature block, aligning it directly beneath the corrupted file path housing the bot farm traffic. The metadata confirms the chief executive officer had direct, intentional knowledge of the fraudulent architecture, I concluded, the finality of the statement ringing off the glass walls. He verified the ghost servers himself 7 hours ago. The culpability is absolute. I lowered the clicker. The presentation was over. The execution was complete. I reached down and unplugged the connection cable from my encrypted tablet. The massive digital screen behind me blinked twice, then faded to a neutral black, plunging the front of the room back into the natural morning sunlight reflecting off the Pacific Ocean. I picked up my tablet and tucked it securely under my arm. I turned away from the blank screen and looked down the length of the mahogany table. I bypassed Liam, who was staring blankly at his trembling hands. I bypassed Susan, who was silently weeping into a linen handkerchief. I locked my eyes directly onto my father. William stared back at me. The authoritarian patriarch was gone. In his place sat a hollow, broken man who realized the leverage he tried to wield in the lobby had been a delusion. He had threatened to erase me from the family if I did not protect his son's deal. I held his gaze, ensuring he felt the full weight of the consequence he had engineered. As an auditor, my duty is to protect the acquiring shareholders from toxic liabilities, I said. My voice was quiet, lacking any trace of vengeance, carrying only the sterile chill of a balanced ledger. I am protecting the deal by killing it. The room is dead silent. The evidence is absolute. What is Marcus's final verdict? The silence in the boardroom was absolute. It was the kind of quiet that follows a catastrophic structural failure, the moment when the dust has not yet settled, but everyone realizes the building is gone. The morning sunlight reflecting off the Pacific continued to spill across the mahogany table, indifferent to the empire that had just been vaporized. Marcus Sterling did not look at the blank screen behind me. He did not look at the champagne bottles sweating in the silver bucket. He looked at Liam. The billionaire's expression was devoid of anger. Anger implies a loss of control, an emotional reaction to a perceived threat. Marcus did not view Liam as a threat. He viewed him as a contamination. The acquisition offer is formally rescinded, Marcus stated. His voice was flat, carrying the sterile authority of a judge issuing a sentence. The letter of intent is void due to material misrepresentation and criminal fraud during the due diligence period. Liam flinched as if he had been struck. The bespoke Italian suit crumpled around his shoulders. "Marcus, wait, please. You have to let me explain." "There is no explanation required," Marcus continued, cutting through the desperate plea. "You attempted to sell me stolen intellectual property wrapped in a synthetic framework. You falsified user acquisition metrics to inflate the valuation of a hollow asset." He turned his head slightly, addressing the lead counsel seated to his right. "Contact federal regulators immediately. We are legally obligated to file a report with the Securities and Exchange Commission regarding the fraudulent disclosures presented during our preliminary review." The lawyer nodded once, pulling his phone from his pocket. The action was swift and merciless. Liam broke. The polished tech founder persona, cultivated over a decade of unearned validation and parental enabling, shattered into jagged pieces. The arrogance evaporated, replaced by a pathetic, visceral panic. He stood up, knocking his heavy leather chair backward. It collided with the glass wall with a dull thud. No, you cannot do that," Liam begged, his voice cracking into a high, reedy pitch. "If you go to the SEC, my investors will pull out. The startup will collapse. I will go to prison." He leaned over the table, extending his hands toward Marcus in a gesture of pure desperation. "We can fix this. I can restructure the company. I can license the code from Ava legally. We can negotiate a lower buyout price. Just give me a chance to make it right. Do not destroy my life over a mistake." Marcus stared at the trembling hands hovering over the polished wood. "You destroyed your own life the moment you believed I was foolish enough to buy a lie." Liam realized the billionaire was immovable. The logic was absolute. He spun around, his frantic gaze searching for a lifeline. He looked at William, but our father was staring blankly at the tabletop, paralyzed by the sudden realization of his own impending financial doom. Liam turned to his left, Elise. Elise sat perfectly still, her posture impeccably straight. She had not spoken a word since the presentation began. She had watched the data unfold with the clinical detachment of a seasoned financial officer evaluating a toxic asset. She looked at her husband, taking in his sweat-slicked face, his frantic breathing, his total lack of dignity. "Elise, honey," Liam pleaded, his voice dropping to a wet, desperate whisper. "Talk to him, please. Explain to him that we are family. We can handle this internally." Elise did not speak. She raised her left hand, resting it gently on the leather portfolio in front of her. With her right hand, she grasped the 3-carat diamond engagement ring on her finger. She pulled it off in one smooth, unbroken motion. She set the ring on the mahogany table. The heavy platinum band made a sharp, resonant clink against the wood. She stood up, picked up her portfolio, and walked toward the boardroom doors. She did not look back. She did not offer a tear, a scream, or a dramatic exit line. She excised the liability from her life with the same ruthless efficiency her father used to govern his empire. The heavy glass doors swung shut behind her, sealing Liam's fate. He stared at the diamond ring resting on the table. The symbol of his ruined future caught the morning light, mocking him. A strangled sob escaped his throat. He sank back into his chair, burying his face in his trembling hands. The systemic ruin finally breached the threshold of William's paralysis. The patriarch blinked, his eyes darting around the room, the terrifying math of the fallout calculating in his mind. Without the sterling buyout, the infusion of capital Liam promised would never arrive. Aegis Logistics would declare bankruptcy within the week. The Nevada Shell Company would stop paying the hosting fees. The bot farm would go dark. And the variable rate second mortgages tied to the commercial properties in San Jose and Palo Alto would default. William was not just watching his son's career end. He was watching his own legacy burn to the ground. The performative wealth, the country club prestige, the carefully curated image of the successful patriarch, it was all gone. He would lose the properties. He would face foreclosure. He had bankrupted himself and his wife to protect a lie. William stood up. His movements were jerky, uncoordinated. "Marcus, listen to me," he commanded, attempting to summon the deep, authoritative voice he had used to control his family for decades. "This is a severe overreaction. My son made a miscalculation under extreme pressure. He is young. We can contain this. We can reach an equitable settlement." Marcus Sterling looked at my father, his expression hardening into pure disdain. "You do not have the capital to reach an equitable settlement, William, and you do not have the authority to negotiate in this room." The billionaire tapped a button on the intercom set into the table. "Security to the executive boardroom." Susan let out a sharp cry, finally comprehending the totality of the devastation. She looked at me, standing quietly at the far end of the room with my tablet tucked under my arm. Her eyes were wide, brimming with tears and a toxic, misdirected anger. "Ava, tell them," Susan cried out, her voice rising in hysteria. "Tell them you made a mistake. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. How can you do this to us? How can you stand there and watch your family be destroyed?" I looked at the woman who had spent 33 years enabling a parasite while ignoring my existence. "You destroyed yourselves, Mom," I said, my voice carrying no malice, only the cold truth of consequence. "You just handed me the match." The boardroom doors opened. 2 towering security guards stepped into the room, their dark suits matching the grim severity of the lawyers. "Escort these 3 individuals out of the building," Marcus ordered, gesturing toward the crumbling family unit at the side of the table. "Ensure they do not access any secured areas on their way down." The guards moved forward with professional efficiency. One placed a hand firmly on Liam's shoulder, hauling the broken tech founder to his feet. Liam did not resist. He stumbled forward, his eyes glazed, his spirit entirely broken. Susan followed, weeping loudly into her handkerchief, the facade of domestic perfection shattered beyond repair. William resisted for a fraction of a second. He pulled his arm away from the guard's grip, straightening his jacket in a desperate, pathetic attempt to retain a shred of dignity. He looked back at Marcus, then looked down the long mahogany table at me. The authoritarian king, stripped of his kingdom, staring at the architect who had drafted his ruin. He turned and walked out the door, flanked by security. I watched them leave. I did not feel a rush of triumphant adrenaline. I did not feel the fiery satisfaction of revenge. Revenge is a chaotic emotional burn. What I felt was clean. What I felt was the cold, structural piece of a balanced ledger. The math had finally corrected itself. The liabilities had been purged. The heavy glass doors swung shut, clicking into place. The boardroom was suddenly very quiet. The lawyers returned their attention to their briefcases, packing away the unneeded contracts. Marcus remained seated at the head of the table. He reached out, picked up the diamond ring Elise had left behind, and slipped it into his jacket pocket. He turned his head and looked down the length of the table, fixing his gaze on me. The family is ruined by their own lies. But what happens to the invisible daughter who brought them down? The weeks following the boardroom presentation unfolded with the predictable, unyielding velocity of a controlled demolition. When a hollow structure loses its primary support, the collapse is never quiet. It generates a tremendous amount of noise, drawing spectators from miles around to watch the dust settle over the wreckage. I monitored the fallout from the quiet sanctuary of my San Francisco apartment, tracking the variables as they shifted from private consequence to public spectacle. The business sections of the regional papers caught the scent of the disaster within days. The first headline dropped on a Tuesday. Aegis Logistics acquisition rescinded. Sterling Logistics cites due diligence irregularities. By Friday, the narrative had escalated from irregularities to outright criminality. The Securities and Exchange Commission formally announced an investigation into the startup's user acquisition metrics and capital expenditures. The venture capitalists who had funded Liam's initial seed round reacted with the panicked speed of rats fleeing a submerged hull. They filed civil suits to recoup their investments, simultaneously issuing press releases to distance themselves from the disgraced founder. Without the influx of Marcus Sterling's capital, Aegis Logistics declared Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The ghost servers went dark. The synthetic traffic stopped flowing. The empty shell of the company crumpled under the weight of its own operational debt. Liam was indicted on federal charges of wire fraud and investor deception. The polished tech founder, the golden child who had commanded the head of the dining room table, was now required to surrender his passport and post a substantial bond to avoid pretrial detention. The media published a photograph of him leaving the federal courthouse. He looked haggard, his designer suit hanging loosely on his frame, his eyes cast downward to avoid the camera lenses. The systemic rot I had exposed ensured the destruction did not stop at my brother's doorstep. The financial contagion spread upward, infecting the very foundation of the family legacy. When the Nevada shell company ceased operations, the true purpose of my father's secret loans became undeniable. The regional commercial bank that held the variable rate second mortgages initiated an aggressive audit of William's assets. Facing the impending default and the exposure of his complicity in a federal crime, William attempted to liquidate his portfolio. The real estate market, however, is unforgiving to desperate sellers. The commercial properties in San Jose and Palo Alto were forced into foreclosure proceedings. The performative wealth that had defined my parents' existence evaporated. The country club memberships were revoked. The luxury vehicles were repossessed. The gated enclave in Palo Alto, staged so perfectly for dinner parties and societal climbing, was placed on the market at a significant loss. Every asset William had acquired over 3 decades was drained away to cover the exorbitant retainer fees of Liam's criminal defense attorneys. They mortgaged their reality to protect a lie, and the lie had consumed them entirely. I sat at my desk sipping black coffee, organizing the digital documentation of the legal outcomes. I created a secure archive, tying off every loose end of the conflict. The contrast between my current state and the chaos consuming my family was absolute. The people who had obsessed over appearances, who had sacrificed my dignity for a photo op, were now splashed across the business pages in utter disgrace. Meanwhile, the invisible daughter, the family failure, remained pristine, untouched by the scandal, observing the collapse from a safe, analytical distance. My phone vibrated against the matte finish of the desk. I glanced at the screen. One new voicemail. The caller ID displayed my mother's number. I had blocked incoming calls from William and Liam the moment I left the Sterling headquarters. I had left Susan's number unblocked, not out of lingering affection, but out of a clinical curiosity regarding how long it would take the primary enabler to pivot her strategy. It took exactly 32 days. I tapped the screen and engaged the speakerphone. The audio quality was sharp, capturing the ragged, exhausted intake of breath before Susan spoke. "Ava, please do not delete this," she began. Her voice was stripped of the melodic, practiced pitch she used for polite society. It sounded thin, scraped raw by weeks of relentless stress and public humiliation. "I know you are angry," she continued, a wet sob interrupting her words. "I know we made mistakes. We were blind. We were foolish to put so much pressure on Liam. Your father is a broken man. He has barely left his study in 3 weeks. We are losing the house, Ava. The bank is taking everything. I listened to the litany of consequences, my expression neutral. She was detailing the exact mathematical outcome I had predicted during our last phone call. I am so sorry, Ava, she cried. I am sorry we did not see your potential. I am sorry we let him take credit for your hard work. You are brilliant. You always were. We were just too stupid to understand it. The apology hung in the quiet air of my apartment. For 33 years, I had craved those words. I had wanted validation. I had wanted the people who brought me into the world to look at me and recognize my worth. But hearing the apology now, filtered through the static of a voicemail, it carried no weight. It was hollow. It was transactional. Please, Ava, Susan begged, the true purpose of the call finally surfacing. Liam is facing real prison time. The federal prosecutors will not offer a plea deal. But Marcus Sterling holds all the leverage. If he drops his cooperation, if he withdraws the formal complaint, the SEC might reduce the charges. The sob turned into a frantic, desperate gasp. You saved his company twice. He respects you. He listens to you. You are the only one who can talk to him. Please, call Marcus. Ask him to show mercy. We are begging you. You are our only hope. Save your family, Ava. Please. The recording ended. The mechanical voice of the automated system offered the options to save or delete the message. I sat in the ergonomic chair, evaluating the strategic architecture of her plea. The enabler had finally acknowledged my competence, not because she valued it, but because she needed to weaponize it to protect the golden child one last time. She was asking me to compromise my integrity, to burn the professional capital I had earned with Marcus Sterling, to shield a criminal from the consequences of his actions. She wanted me to build a bridge over the chasm they had dug themselves. I reached out and tapped the screen. The icon flashed red. Message deleted. The audio file vanished from the server, erased from existence with the same cold finality Elise had used when she placed her diamond ring on the boardroom table. The emotional tether was permanently severed. I owed them nothing. The ledger was balanced. I picked up my coffee mug and turned my attention back to the primary monitor, ready to close the Aegis Logistics archive folder for good. Before my hand touched the mouse, the phone vibrated again. I looked at the screen. It was not an automated notification. It was a direct, incoming call. The caller ID displayed a private number, but the routing prefix was familiar. It belonged to the executive exchange of Sterling Logistics. I set the mug down. I let the phone ring 3 times, allowing the rhythm to establish a professional cadence, before I accepted the connection and brought the receiver to my ear. Ava James, I answered. Ava, the voice on the other end said. The tone was unhurried, carrying the unmistakable gravitas of a man who controlled vast empires. It was Marcus Sterling. Good morning, Marcus, I replied, my voice steady, mirroring his professional calm. I trust the fallout has not disturbed your routine, he said, a subtle undercurrent of respect threading through his words. I prefer to observe chaotic systems from a distance, I answered. The data tends to be cleaner. He let out a short, genuine laugh. It was a sound rarely heard in the upper echelons of his corporate structure. I appreciate clarity, Ava. It is a rare commodity, which is why I am calling. I waited, offering the silence necessary for him to present his objective. I am having lunch at the Silicon Valley Executive Club at noon today, Marcus continued. I have reserved a private dining room. I would like you to join me. We have a final piece of business to conclude regarding the shadow audit. The invitation was not a request. It was a directive, wrapped in polite corporate protocol. I will be there, I said. Excellent. I will see you at 12, Marcus replied, and ended the call. I lowered the phone, the quiet hum of the apartment rushing back in. The family was ruined by their own lies, the liabilities successfully purged from the system. But the billionaire who had orchestrated the final execution was now asking for a meeting. What does Marcus Sterling want now? The Silicon Valley Executive Club operates entirely on the currency of silence. There are no flashing cameras, no forced networking events, and no opulent displays of manufactured wealth. The architecture is steeped in understated permanence, featuring heavy oak doors, muted lighting, and deeply upholstered leather booths. It is a sanctuary built specifically for the people who actually own the boardrooms, a place insulated from the desperate scrambling of founders trying to fake their way to a valuation. I handed the keys of my modest sedan to the valet and walked through the discreet front entrance. The maitre d' did not ask for my name or a reservation number. He simply offered a polite nod, recognizing me instantly, and guided me down a private corridor lined with sound-absorbing mahogany panels. We arrived at a secluded dining room overlooking the sprawling expanse of the valley. The table was set for two. Marcus Sterling was already seated, reading a printed brief while taking a sip of mineral water. He wore a dark, unstructured suit jacket, projecting an air of relaxed, unassailable authority. He set the brief aside as I entered. He stood up, offering a respectful nod, and gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Thank you for coming, Ava," Marcus said. I took my seat, placing my clutch on the adjacent chair. The view from the window was spectacular, framing the technological heart of California in a sweeping panoramic vista. "It is a beautiful venue," I replied, keeping my tone measured. The waiter appeared silently, poured a glass of sparkling water for me, and vanished just as quickly. We did not engage in trivial small talk. We ordered our meals, and Marcus immediately shifted the focus to the architecture of the fallout. He informed me that Elise was navigating the dissolution of her brief marriage with the clinical precision he had taught her. She had returned to her role as chief financial officer of his division, channeling her energy into restructuring their international supply chains. The toxic liability had been excised before it could compromise their foundation. "You performed a surgical extraction," Marcus stated, cutting his steak with methodical precision. "You navigated a highly volatile emotional minefield without allowing the sentiment to corrupt your data. That requires a specific type of discipline, a discipline I rarely encounter, even at the highest levels of my own organization." I took a sip of my water. "I simply followed the packet routing," I said. "The numbers provided the map. I just read the topography." Marcus set his knife down. He picked up a sleek, black leather folder resting beside his plate and slid it across the polished table. It stopped precisely in front of my glass. "I need someone who can read the topography on a permanent basis," he said. I looked at the folder, then up at the billionaire. "The chief information officer of my primary logistics conglomerate recently announced his retirement," Marcus explained, his voice taking on the sharp, decisive cadence of a chief executive closing a major acquisition. "The board is currently evaluating external candidates. I am halting that search. I want you to take the position." The offer hung in the quiet air of the private dining room. I stared at the closed leather folder. Inside that portfolio was the ultimate validation. It was a C-suite executive title. It came with an equity stake, a corner office overlooking the Pacific, and a salary that would eclipse my previous decade of earnings in a single fiscal year. The profound, inescapable irony of the moment washed over me. William had mortgaged his commercial real estate portfolio, bankrupting himself and my mother, all to buy his son a brief, fraudulent audience with Marcus Sterling. Liam had stolen my intellectual property and committed federal wire fraud just to secure a fraction of the billionaire's approval. My family had destroyed themselves trying to pick the lock on the front door of the empire. And now, the emperor was sliding the keys across the table to the invisible daughter. The family failure. I did not reach for the folder. I kept my hands folded in my lap. I listened to the hum of the climate control system, mapping the trajectory of the life Marcus was offering me. It was a golden ticket. It was everything my parents had worshipped. But I looked at the gold, and I recognized the shape of the cage. "I appreciate the magnitude of this offer, Marcus," I said. My voice was steady, rooted in a deep, unshakable certainty. I understand exactly what this portfolio represents. Then open it, he suggested, a hint of genuine anticipation in his eyes. I shook my head slowly. I cannot accept the position. Marcus blinked, the anticipation freezing into genuine surprise. In his world, people did not decline a seat at his table. They spent their entire careers bleeding for the opportunity to pull out a chair. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "May I ask why?" he inquired, his tone devoid of offense, carrying only an analytical curiosity. "Are the compensation metrics insufficient? We can adjust the equity distribution." "It has nothing to do with the compensation," I replied, maintaining unwavering eye contact. "It is about the architecture of the role. If I accept the title of Chief Information Officer, I become a component of your corporate hierarchy. I have to manage internal politics. I have to navigate board members, sit in executive meetings, and defend my budgets against competing divisions. I have to wear the uniform of the entity." I paused, letting my gaze drift momentarily to the sprawling valley below, before bringing it back to the billionaire. "I spent 33 years trapped inside a toxic hierarchy," I explained, laying my philosophy bare. "I was assigned a role I did not choose, governed by rules designed to extract my value while erasing my presence. I promised myself I would never be owned by another system again. I refused to trade a familial cage for a corporate one, no matter how lucrative the constraints might be." Marcus listened intently, absorbing the underlying logic of my refusal. "I am a data systems architect," I continued. "I find the broken nodes. I isolate the rot. I fix the structural failures. But I can only do that effectively if I remain outside the blast radius. I prefer the autonomy of the shadows. I prefer to be the mechanic, not the machine." Silence descended upon the private dining room. Marcus stared at me for a long, calculating minute. He looked at the closed leather folder, then back at my face. The surprise in his eyes slowly transformed into a deep, profound respect. He reached across the table and pulled the portfolio back toward his side of the table. "You are a sovereign entity, Ava," Marcus said, a rare smile touching the corners of his mouth. "I can respect that boundary. But I still require your specific diagnostic capabilities. My network is expanding, and I need a mechanic who operates outside the political blast radius." He reached into his jacket pocket, produced a silver pen, and flipped the leather folder open. He crossed out the primary employment contract, turned to the final page, and drafted a series of numbers in the margin. He slid the folder back across the table. "An independent consulting retainer," Marcus proposed. "You retain your total autonomy. You accept no corporate title. You report exclusively to me, and only when a critical structural vulnerability requires an uncompromised audit. You set your own hours. You dictate your own methods." I looked at the number he had written in the margin. The retainer fee was exorbitant, a figure that secured absolute financial independence for the rest of my life. It was not a salary. It was a sovereign grant. I picked up the silver pen resting on the table. I signed my name at the bottom of the page. We finished our lunch discussing logistical theory and the evolving nature of encrypted supply chains. It was a conversation between equals, devoid of performative arrogance or hidden agendas. When the meal concluded, Marcus stood, offered a firm professional handshake, and departed to manage his empire. I drove back to the city as the late afternoon sun began to dip toward the horizon. The traffic flowed smoothly, a functional system operating without friction. I unlocked the door to my minimalist San Francisco apartment. The space was quiet, clean, and perfectly aligned. I walked past the kitchen and entered my home office. The 3 curved monitors sat dark, waiting for an input command. I stood by the window, looking out over the skyline. The glass towers of the financial district caught the fading sunlight, glowing like pillars of fire against the encroaching dusk. My mind drifted back to the ballroom at the coastal estate. I remembered the heavy scent of orchids, the flash of the cameras, and the suffocating grip of Liam's fingers around my wrist. I remembered his smirk as he introduced me to the billionaire. This is our family failure. He had intended it as an execution. He had intended to cement my status as the invisible disappointment, the defective component in their curated machine. But he fundamentally misunderstood the nature of engineering. He did not realize that when a system is inherently corrupt, failing to conform to its parameters is not a defect, it is a triumph. William, Susan, and Liam had built a towering house out of fabricated metrics, stolen intellect, and leveraged debt. They believed they could defy the basic laws of physics as long as the paint looked expensive. But gravity is a relentless auditor. It does not care about your social connections. It does not care about your charming smile or your tailored suits. Gravity always pulls down a house built on lies. I turned away from the window and walked over to my desk. I pressed the power button on the primary tower. The fans spun to life with a quiet, reassuring hum. The monitors flared blue, casting their familiar, comforting glow across the dark room. I picked up my mug, took a sip of hot, black coffee, and pulled the ergonomic keyboard toward my chest. A new, highly complex data set was waiting in my encrypted inbox, sent directly from Marcus Sterling's private server. I cracked my knuckles, aligning my fingers over the keys. Peace is not something you inherit. It is not something you are given by the people who demand your silence. Peace is a structure you build yourself, one honest line of code at a time. Peace is earned. I initiated the sequence and began to work. The collapse of Aegis Logistics was chronicled extensively in the financial sections of regional newspapers, framed by journalists as a modern cautionary tale of Silicon Valley hubris and corporate fraud. But the true story, the one that lives in the quiet, aching spaces between the court filings and the foreclosure notices, is not about technological espionage or venture capital. It is a story about the profound, devastating consequences of parental blindness. When the dust finally settled over the shattered remains of the James family, the most tragic casualty was not the loss of their commercial real estate portfolio or the revocation of their country club prestige. The true casualty was the realization that a family had spent 3 decades meticulously building a monument to a lie, entirely neglecting the foundation of character required to sustain it. In American culture, we are often sold a specific, intoxicating version of the dream. We are told to project confidence, to leverage our networks, and to relentlessly pursue the optics of success. The pressure to present a flawless domestic portrait to the neighborhood, the community, and the world at large can be suffocating. For William and Susan, this cultural messaging became a toxic religion. They looked at their son, Liam, and saw the perfect vessel for their own unresolved ambitions. They raised a golden child. But in their desperate, unwavering need to see him shine, they stripped him of the one psychological tool every human being needs to survive the real world: accountability. Parenting is not merely the act of providing capital or securing advantageous social introductions. It is the sacred, often uncomfortable responsibility of providing a moral compass. By constantly shielding Liam from the consequences of his failures, by quietly covering his debts and applauding his hollow charm, William and Susan did not protect their son. They disarmed him. They raised a man who knew how to wear a bespoke suit and command a boardroom, but who possessed absolutely no internal architecture. When the storm of reality finally arrived, Liam had no deep roots to hold him steady, only the fragile synthetic scaffolding his parents had purchased for him at the cost of their own ruin. True family responsibility requires fairness, a value that was glaringly absent at the James family dinner table. Fairness does not mean treating every child exactly the same, but it fundamentally requires applying the same metrics of honesty, respect, and moral weight to each of them. While Liam was handed the keys to a kingdom he had not earned, Ava was relegated to the shadows. She was the invisible daughter, the scapegoat whose quiet brilliance was viewed not as an asset to be nurtured, but as an inconvenience to be hidden. The emotional trauma inflicted upon a child when they realize their worth is measured only by how well they serve a fabricated family narrative is a quiet, enduring violence. Ava learned to build her own armor, retreating into the cold, predictable logic of data, because the people who were supposed to protect her were too busy worshiping a mirage. The parents failed to recognize that by erasing their daughter to elevate their son, they were denying themselves the profound joy of knowing the most capable, resilient member of their own bloodline. A traditional family structure is often heralded as the bedrock of a stable society, providing a safe harbor in a chaotic world. However, that structure is only as strong as the emotional awareness of the parents steering the ship. Emotional awareness means having the courage to look at your children clearly, not as extensions of your own ego, but as sovereign individuals with their own distinct flaws and merits. It means having the fortitude to tell your son, "You have failed, and now you must do the hard work of rebuilding," rather than secretly mortgaging your own future to buy him a fake empire. William's ultimate betrayal in the apartment lobby was not financial, it was deeply moral. He confused enablement with paternal love. He believed that securing Liam's status in the world was his ultimate duty as a father, completely blind to the fact that true parental duty is raising a child who does not need to steal to feel significant. When William attempted to bribe Ava with a fraudulent corporate title, he revealed the complete bankruptcy of his value system. He taught his children that truth is a commodity to be bought and sold, a lesson that ultimately destroyed everything he loved. Long-term guidance for children demands that we prioritize character over credentials. We must teach them that true peace and genuine success are never handed down on a silver platter or secured through a charming smile. They are earned through quiet, unseen, and often unrewarded labor. When we reward performative arrogance while ignoring quiet competence, we signal to our children that the truth is negotiable. We teach them that a polished lie is more valuable than an unvarnished reality. The James family paid the ultimate price for this inversion of values. Their tragedy serves as a stark, unforgiving reminder that gravity is the ultimate auditor of our lives. You can dress a lie in expensive linen, you can introduce it to billionaires, and you can defend it with aggressive ultimatums. But eventually, the math will correct itself. The ledger always balances. The stories that resonate most deeply with us are the ones that force us to look in the mirror and question the foundations we are building in our own homes and our own lives. If you have ever felt the silent sting of being the overlooked child, or if you have witnessed the slow, inevitable collapse of a system built on familial lies, you understand the vital importance of speaking the truth. For more stories about navigating the complex, often painful dynamics of family justice, confronting toxic hierarchies, and finding the courage to balance your own ledger, be sure to follow the Revenge Order channel. We explore the quiet strength it takes to break generational cycles and the ultimate satisfaction of letting the truth speak for itself. Subscribe, share your own experiences in the comments, and join a community that values authenticity over optics. As the years pass, one has to wonder what remains in the quiet, empty rooms of the house William and Susan lost. The echoes of clinking champagne glasses and practiced laughter have long since faded, replaced by the heavy, immutable silence of consequence. Ava walks free, unbound by the toxic hierarchy, building a life of undeniable substance and earned peace. But for those who are still caught in the performance, a lingering, uncomfortable question remains. When you look at the life you are constructing for your children, when you evaluate the values you praise at your own dinner table, what are you actually building? Are you laying a foundation of unshakable stone, rooted in honesty, fairness, and the quiet resilience to weather the truth? Or are you simply paying for a beautiful, fragile facade, holding your breath in the dark and hoping the wind never blows?